Hey, welcome to the OT Asset Management Weekly webinar. Today, I'm going to discuss one of the most misrepresented topics in OT security, which is OT asset discovery. Isn't that interesting? So it's absolutely amazing how many people have a very firm opinion about OT asset discovery, even though they have little experience in that space. And so this is what I want to unravel in today's webinar. And in order to do this, I want you to focus first on the question, why do we actually need OT asset discovery? What do we need it for? And that is basically very simple: in order to create an OT asset inventory. And as you have heard it so many times, I would say probably hundreds of times, you cannot protect what you don't know. So apparently we're all on the same page if we assume that an OT asset inventory is the foundation of OT security, because otherwise, well, you cannot really make good assumptions about your risk posture, about your attack surface, etc. So this is one important use case for an OT asset inventory. You need it for your risk assessments, you need it for your vulnerability management, and also for engineering use cases such as obsolescence management. If you don't have a good OT asset inventory, you will not be able to actually perform when it comes to these use cases, which are becoming more and more important. So then let's go a little bit deeper and consider, well, what are the requirements of an OT asset inventory that could act as the foundation for these use cases? And that is actually very simple. In order to hit the mentioned use cases, you need an OT asset inventory that has full coverage over your over your installed base, that is detailed, and that is scalable when you think about the discovery process. So what does that mean? Let's try to unravel this. If your OT asset inventory doesn't have full coverage of your installed base, you can be absolutely certain that anything you do in respect to risk management, vulnerability management will be off by a large margin. Why is that? Because when it comes to risk management, it's always about prioritization. And you can only start your prioritization if you see the full universe, because there might be that black hole out there that is out of your scope that might actually carry the most risk, so that it would warrant your biggest efforts for risk remediation. And if you don't see that, you're just wasting your time, and you're creating a false sense of security. The other thing is certainly related when you think about vulnerability management. You also need that full coverage, and you need a very detailed OT asset inventory. Why? Because all the known vulnerabilities, all the 250,000 something, affect very specific software or firmware versions. If you don't know exactly which versions you have installed, you cannot do OT vulnerability management. And also, if it's just more a gray zone, you don't exactly know. You have, let's just say, a bunch of PLCs with CPUs of this and that make and model, but you don't know exactly the firmware version that's installed. You could guess, well, it might be affected by the latest vulnerability that Rockwell or Siemens has published. You don't know for sure, so you put it out there, you expose that vulnerability, and put a likelihood or a probability on it. That is not the foundation for OT vulnerability management, my friends. Sorry, but it doesn't work that way. And then finally, when you even think beyond OT security, when you think about engineering use cases, just consider obsolescence management. And I'm talking about full coverage here. If your OT asset inventory, as an example, does not cover all the devices in your field buses, so I'm thinking about ControlNet, DeviceNet, etc., Circos, then you will just miss the train, because this is actually the area where you will find most obsolete devices. So if you don't bother to also check those legacy technologies, then you won't be able to succeed in obsolescence management. So that gives us a couple of good indicators of what we need when it comes to an OT asset inventory, and we are going to build that OT asset inventory via asset discovery. We need something that will provide us full coverage, that is very detailed, and the discovery process itself is scalable. Now, there used to be different discovery variants that have been used, that are still used, and certainly the first one is manual discovery. You do a walk-down inspection, you send a couple of poor fellows through the plant from control system cabinet to control system cabinet and let them check out what is actually in there. And unfortunately, that doesn't yield a useful OT asset inventory, because it is too labor intense, especially when you consider if you wanted to do a good job, you would have to also record the firmware versions that are installed, and that is just, it's too laborsome. So even though the vast majority of asset owners do it today, it will not yield a useful OT asset inventory. So if you're still doing that, and you send your guys around and they record everything in Microsoft Excel, I strongly suggest that you stop that behavior, because you're just wasting time. This will never yield an asset inventory that is useful for any OT security or engineering use cases. That leads us to automatic discovery. And in the automatic discovery realm, you find a couple of different technological approaches. The first one that I'm going to discuss, which is probably mostly used, is based on passive sniffing. So you just record the network traffic in real time. And based on the interactions between all those OT components, you try to figure out what the make and model of these devices could be, what the installed firmware version could be, the serial number, etc. And unfortunately, that only goes so far, and I will come back to a couple of limitations of this approach a little bit later, in a couple of minutes. Then we have active discovery, which is basically two separate technologies. So it really makes sense to take a closer look of what is referred to as active discovery. On one side, you have active discovery as it is implemented in IT asset management products. And in that realm, you usually find discovery procedures that just throw more or less random probes at an endpoint. In many cases, the discovery software opens a couple of thousand TCP connections, and that has led many observers rightly to assume, well, this is not good. In an OT environment, that's probably something that you shouldn't do, because it creates a lot of network traffic, and that can be detrimental to your control systems. And certainly it is in many cases. So that has resulted in a large objection against active discovery, because people assume, well, this network load is just too heavy for these control networks, and especially for the OT products that are not designed to handle such network traffic. Now, the thing is, there is another approach, and this is what we use in OTbase and what we call targeted probing or selective probing, and that is totally different because that approach doesn't open thousands of TCP connections. If you want to understand how that actually works, maybe the best example is just consider you're using Rockwell RS links, or you're using Siemens TIA portal. Guess what? They're doing active discovery. They will show you all the PLCs on a given network. They will show you all the peripherals, the drives, the sensors. It's a dream come true. And they're doing active discovery. Now, how cool would it be if we would simply do the same thing, but across the board for all the other vendors as well, including Siemens, including Beckhoff, and then also as the icing on the cake, also discover the network switch configurations, the Windows PC configurations with all the installed software, etc. Okay, so this is actually, in a nutshell, what active discovery is all about as implemented in the OTbase OT asset management software. This is the big difference. If you want to understand what we are doing, just think about your engineering software. And now let's revisit the objection, well, that heavy network traffic. And that is pure and simple nonsense, or BS, as you can also call it. It's agenda-driven nonsense. If you take the effort and examine the network communication for such an active discovery process as implemented in OTbase, that takes a couple of seconds. And then we have the data that we need, including all the details, make and model, firmware version, serial number, the I/O modules on the backplane, including their serial numbers and their firmware versions. That takes a couple of seconds, and then it's done. So that OT endpoint will not be pestered by, I don't know, megabytes of unnecessary communication. So it's very targeted. It uses legitimate protocols, just like you see it in the engineering software products from the various vendors. And this discovery process, as implemented in OTbase, occurs every 24 hours in a deterministic fashion. So that in between, nothing happens. OTbase is silent. And as a result, what we have learned is that this is a very, very reliable and very efficient process to arrive at a detailed, comprehensive OT asset inventory with full coverage. And that is the next thing that is very important. So when you consider the scalability of the various approaches that I have mentioned, certainly the manual discovery is the worst. That is, you cannot do a full coverage of your OT networks unless you're operating, let's just say, a small sewage plant. Then you could certainly manually discover your, I don't know, 50 OT devices. But when it comes to several thousand devices, maybe over 100,000 devices, as some of our customers are operating, it's just a big no-go. You will never get there. You will just waste time. When we think about the passive discovery, that is very similar because it doesn't scale as well. Since you rely on hardware sensors that you need to implement in your various process networks. Now, guess what? You will never be able to do that at scale. All right, so you have to limit the scope that you are actually discovering for cost reasons. And that means you will end up with an incomplete OT asset inventory that will certainly result in your expert missing cyber risk, not being able to efficiently do vulnerability management, And certainly when you think about those engineering use cases, obsolescence management, they will never see devices in field bus networks. Right, so that's just a no-go, and therefore the utility that you get from passive discovery is very, very limited. The random scanning active approach, you can certainly rule that out. That is something that doesn't work in an OT environment. The targeted probing as implemented in OTbase, that goes a very, very long way. And that allows you, or it allows our customers to get a full coverage over their, let's just say 100,000 devices globally. So this is why we have chosen to only focus on targeted discovery, because it's the only technology that meets the requirements that you have for an OT asset inventory, which is the foundation of OT security and engineering and maintenance use cases. If you actually want to have such a foundation, targeted discovery active is the only way to go. When you think about the scalability, we don't need hardware sensors, so it's a software-only process that you can install at no extra cost in all your OT networks. So even if you think about a highly segregated architecture, which I hope you have, well, it doesn't come with any additional hardware cost when you want to install additional discovery nodes in all those segregated networks, because we don't charge for those discovery deployments. It's just something that you install on existing hardware, and that really goes a long way. So let's take a closer look at the various drawbacks of passive discovery. It just tells you too little about your OT endpoints. In many cases, it's very limited to, let's just say, just the manufacturer, but you don't necessarily get all the full configuration of a device. And that in turn means that you cannot use that as a basis for your vulnerability management, because if you don't know exactly the firmware version that's running, you cannot match it against all those CVEs. That it just doesn't happen. And then certainly you may have seen it, the vendors try to work around this issue by attaching a probability to the CVE match, but that is just not feasible, because OT vulnerability management is already such a monumental task, because you have to deal with hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities. Please, if you are not aware of this, check out other videos on our channel where I discuss the vulnerability landscape in OT. So if for this monumental task that is difficult enough, you have to start out with first determining if the CVE is real or if it's a false positive. You will go nowhere. It's just a waste of time. The other problem that you see associated with the passive discovery is, and don't get me wrong, so I'm only talking about OT asset inventory. I'm not dismissing threat detection products at all. I think they have their place for threat detection. But if you use their technology to establish an OT asset inventory, you will not make it when it comes to the use cases that I have mentioned earlier. You will not meet the requirements. Let's look at a different one. If you rely on passive discovery, you will not be able to establish device identity. What do I mean by that? You will not have a system of record for individual devices where you would see, for example, oh, the configuration of that device has changed, so that you can see a timeline, a configuration timeline. You know, somebody has updated the firmware, or somebody has put a new network interface into that box. Somebody has moved that device from one network to another, or even to a different building. Okay, so you will not be able to track those changes. And that certainly is a problem. You will also not be able to do a decent amount of metadata enrichment. So that is probably not a sufficient basis for a useful OT asset inventory. You don't, when you're relying on passive, you cannot establish network identity. What do I mean by that? You will see all those IP addresses. Well, that's nice, but at some point, you will need to figure out, well, this device with IP address 192.168.0.5, in which network is it actually hosted, right? Because now when I do my vulnerability management, when I do my, I don't know, even incident response, I need to know what else is on that network. Just think about it. If you don't know exactly what else is in that network, in that local subnet, how would you want to do incident response? How would you arrive at a solid protective approach if you cannot establish network identity? So, and this is missing when you're doing passive discovery. So that's another reason why we chose to do active, because we were getting all that information from the network interface. We were getting additional information from the management ports of the network switches. So therefore, in OTbase, you will see a network inventory with all your usually hundreds of OT networks exposed. You can see what's in these networks. You can see spare IP addresses. You can make IP address reservations if need be. So that really goes a long way. Then I also already mentioned that when you're relying on passive, you don't have any field bus coverage, and that might be a severe drawback if you also want to do obsolescence management. And I would say if you want to do it or not, it doesn't matter. You have to do it for business continuity reasons, because at some point in time, many of these legacy OT devices will fail. And then you better have a replacement strategy already in your drawer, because you want to prevent outage. And you know how it goes, right? When you need to replace a failed device and you don't have the exact spare, that can result in prolonged outage, which might be much more severe than any given cyber attack that you should worry about. So just to give you an idea of what the various different strategies are, the technologies, I think it's worthwhile just understanding the different approaches and their shortcomings, drawbacks, and their strengths. And in my opinion, when it comes to passive, well, you need it for your anomaly detection, you need it for threat detection, but it does not yield a useful OT asset inventory. So maybe you should consider just combining these two technologies. If you want to learn more about this stuff, then what I would suggest is first, on our website, langner.com, you can actually download OT-based discovery. That is the discovery component of OTbase. And then you can check it out in your lab. You can check it out in your live plant, maybe during scheduled outage, because I know many of you are still hesitant. Oh, I've heard so many bad things about active discovery. Well, as a matter of fact, you have heard a lot of agenda-driven bullshit. And if you want to really get an experience of what everybody is talking about, well, here's your chance. Just check it out. Do so during planned outage if you want, if you're hesitant. But this will be the ultimate proof. And then in OT-based discovery, in the evaluation version that you can download from our website, it's the full product, only in a time-limited version. And even though it doesn't show you all the CVEs, etc., it does show you let's just say the bulk of the technical variables that are discovered from your OT devices. So that is something that I suggest you could do if you wanted to get a better understanding of how OT asset active discovery works. The other thing I would like to point out when you consider the platform. So OT-based discovery comes in a couple of different versions. You get a version for Microsoft Windows, you get one for Linux, you get one for Docker, and the Linux versions you can even get something for Raspberry Pi. So whatever your platform is, you will be able to use it without any problems. There is also an orchestration platform which is called Discovery Manager, where you can then configure or update your, I don't know, couple of hundred OT-based discovery nodes as our customers do. So it's not in a segregated infrastructure is not unusual to see a couple of hundred OT-based discovery nodes running, which again, our customers don't mind because you don't pay for the discovery instances, for the deployments. You pay for the resulting number of assets in the OT-based inventory database. Okay, so that is what I wanted to cover in this webinar. Just another hint, if you want to learn more, when you go to our website, there is also a link to the full product documentation. So you could just check out all the various features, functions, etc., the REST API of OT-based discovery, and certainly the rest, the other parts of the product. Okay, and with that, I would say see you next week, same place, same time. Goodbye.